I have 5 psychological hacks that I've learned over the years that are going to help me increase the price of this one. Now, to really understand how to implement these psychological hacks, you need to understand how value is determined for your property. There are basically 3 different ranges that houses sell for. Now, you can see all the sales in this particular neighborhood, and you can see where the clusters start to get made. Now, we've named each one of these clusters. The first cluster, the cheap one, these are bombed out houses. These are the ones that are going to need gutted or already are gutted. And then we have what we call the barely bankable. Now, these houses are livable, and a bank would give you money to buy it, but they're very outdated. They need work to really take them to the next level, which is the range of comps. This is where all flippers are trying to put their houses on the market at. This is also what you'd call the ARV, the after repair value. When you ask your real estate agent for comps or a comparative analysis, basically what you're doing is taking the 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot house that you just bought, and the real estate agent is finding all the other houses that are just like that. They're comparative to that house. And they're figuring out that once those were fixed up, what did they sell for? And you can basically figure that your house will sell for something like that. Now, I find it easier to look at these 3 ranges on more of a flat line. And we call this flat line the scale of livability. As a house flipper, basically what you're doing is you're trying to buy houses that are on the left side of this scale of livability and move them to the right, ideally into the range of comps. And that's where the money's at, but not equal money. And that's where it's important that you understand return on investment, or ROI. As an investor, I always want to be getting more dollars back than I put into a deal. So for every dollar of rehab that I spend, I want to make sure that I'm getting at least $2 back on my sales price. To help you understand, let's do some quick back of the napkin math. Let's say I buy a house for $100,000, and then I put $30,000 into the renovation of this house. On that $30,000 I spent, I expect to increase the value of the house at least by 2 times of that. So I would expect to sell that $100,000 house for $160,000 after I put in the $30,000. The problem is there's some work that you can do on a house where you don't get a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 return on investment. You only get a 1-to-1 return on investment or worse. The best return on investment is taking a house from bombed out to livable. But sometimes we actually buy these barely bankable houses and we move those into the range of comps. But actually, if you're taking a bombed out house to livable, you might as well take it all the way to the range of comps, because the only difference is really the finishes. But where you really get in trouble is when you have a house that's in the range of comps and then you try to take it further along that line. And this is where your psychological hacks come into play. See, you can move the house up through the range of comps, but you don't have to spend 1-to-1 money to do it. You can actually get a much better return than that. And that's where our big 3 comes into play. This is how we create the filter in which you see the whole property. Basically, the way this works is first I need to understand how somebody is going to drive up to the property and walk through the property. Because I know the first 3 things that somebody sees in a house is going to create the filter in which they see the rest of that house. So I might be able to invest heavily in 20% of the house and get them to see the other 80% of the house the same way. I need to create the initial experience that that person is going to have when they come up to the house. Obviously, for most houses, the exterior is going to be the big thing, but it really depends how they're going to pull up to the house. So for most houses, it's the front door that they're going to pull up to. So you do the natural curb appeal things like landscaping and something with the front porch and paint the front door. But there's some houses where you pull up to the back. And on those types of houses, we might put in a fancy awning on the back door because that's the first thing that they're going to see. Now we have to think about what are they going to see when they open that door. Hopefully it's the kitchen, because it's really easy to upscale a kitchen with some nicer countertops, a big subway tile backsplash, maybe a stainless steel hood vent. That will make the buyer want to buy the house right from the start. And you're already going to be investing money into the kitchen, so taking it a little bit further is going to make a lot of sense on your budget. Now, the third thing is very house dependent. You almost always have to add the curb appeal, and you almost always see the kitchen as soon as you walk in the door. But number 3 might be a bathroom, if there's a bathroom right upon entry. Or maybe it's just a big open living room where you add some nice new floors and a great paint job, and that's good enough. The key here is we want that first 20% that they see, those big 3 items to really sell the house to them. So they want to buy this house before they've even seen the other 80%. All I'm trying to do with the other 80% is not unsell this. Now with the big three, we're creating a filter that is going to push you forward through those range of comps. But this can also work negatively on you. You can also create a filter that just feels wrong and actually brings you down the scale of livability. See, sometimes when potential buyers walk through houses, they say things like, oh, something just feels wrong about this house. I just felt better about that house we saw in Zillow. I think it might be the one. Most people would call this an intuition. But intuition is always backed by actual things. And here's what those things are in your house. It's most likely paint on the door hinges. The trim is just not lined up right, or maybe it's not caulked fully, so there's a little bit of gap in it. The floor just is a little bit slopey. Maybe the handles don't match. Maybe some are stainless steel while other doorknobs in the house are chrome. So what do you do to make sure this doesn't happen to you? It's basically twofold. One is you make a scope of work that plans these things out. So in every house that we do, we have a hardware package where we make sure all the doorknobs, all the hinges, all the cabinet handles, all the light fixtures, the plumbing fixtures, they all are of one finish, like stainless steel or chrome or black, oil rub bronze. And two is you hold accountability to the expectations that you set earlier in the project. You make sure that that trim has been caulked, that that paint job is fully finished. You make sure that after the drywall is complete, they actually dust it off the walls instead of painting over all the drywall dust that makes me so mad. Now, these are just small investments, really of your bandwidth more than your money, because you're already paying for that trim to be caulked. You just have to make sure it actually got done. And most likely you're going to have to put in new hardware or new light fixtures. Just make sure you're putting in the right ones. And now you're getting the maximum sale price increase to the rehab money that you put into that house. Now, doing the big three creates a filter in which the buyer sees the rest of the house as more valuable. But the feels wrong filter actually makes them see it through a lens that makes the rest of the house seem way less valuable. It probably subconsciously makes them think that if that's what they can see, what is it that they can't see? And maybe rightfully so. If you skipped painting a closet, did you skip wiring an outlet correctly too? Now, if you have worked to do all these things on the house, you deserve better than letting this next mistake shoot you in the foot right at the finish line. You see, these previous hacks are about the buyer's psychology, but what about your psychology? What flaws do you have? One is when you're almost to the finish line. You've done 95% of the work, and man, you've been in there working for months, and so you're just ready to get that thing on the market. But what if you did 5% more? Maybe that makes all the difference. But the thing is, you've been in there for so long and you've been looking at those same walls that they start to feel normal to you, but not the person who just walked in for the first time. And guys, I've done this, so I know what it feels like after you've worked on these houses for so long. You just want to get out of there and you want to get your profits. But here's the bigger thing, is what you see in your own mind is that this house used to be trashed. Remember, it was a gutted out house, bombed out as we call it. And now it's a nice, livable house. So in your eyes, you've done a great job. But all that the buyer is going to see when they walk in is, oh, this house is only 95% done. What they'd really say is, it doesn't feel right here. The point that I'm trying to make is that the road from bombed out to range of comps is not totally linear. It's that last 5% that gives you basically all of that 3-to-1 ROI that we were talking about. Again, it's not exact math, but you get the point. You gotta get to the finish line. And one more thing on that. I know this is hard to do because you've been working your butt off on the project, but one of the best things that you can do is bring in a real estate agent or a friend and let them tell you what finishing touches would really make this house pop. But be careful about the renovations that you do on a house because there is a trap that you could find yourself in. And this is what I call if you give a mouse a cookie. You know how the book goes. If you give a mouse a cookie, then he's gonna need a glass of milk to go with it. And if you give him a glass of milk, he's gonna need a straw. And then he's gonna need a napkin, on and on until you're giving him your routing number and buying him Amazon gift cards. Now, we don't want that. Just like you don't want this to happen on your house flip. I see a lot of new real estate investors running into this issue where they think it's gonna be a simple cosmetic fix, but then it just turns into more and more and more. It's like they gave the house a cookie and it needs a little something else to go with it. It looks looks like I'm just gonna put in some new floors, but then you put in some new floors and you need some quarter round to go with it. And once you put in this new quarter round, well, now all that old trim just doesn't look good anymore. So you slap some fresh white paint and caulk on it, but now the walls look old and grimy. So you better paint those too. And now you end up doing a humongous renovation when you just planned on spending a few $1,000s. But the biggest problem here is most of that work has a terrible ROI. You gotta understand, when you bought that house, you bought that wall, you bought those countertops and those cabinets, and they were good enough at the time, and that was all figured into your ARV, your comp. But now you have to redo it all. You're basically just throwing away all those things you bought. One more way to look at that is you're spending a lot of money on that rehab, and the sales price just isn't moving up as fast. Now, how do you prevent that trap? Well, it's all about your strategy on the front end. You need to make sure that you make a smart scope of work and that you don't change horses midstream. This has been a very important lesson for me. Once you have a plan for a house, do not stray from it. Because in my experience, things that seem like they're gonna be a simple fix always snowball into these big renovations that you didn't account for. But what about the people who conscientiously spend more on the rehab than they're ever gonna get on their sales price? I don't think they know they're doing it, but I consider these people more like hobbyists than actual real estate investors. I call them hodgepodgers. They've watched a little bit too much HGTV and they know all the styles, and the problem is they want to use them all in the same house, maybe in the same room. So what do I mean by that? There's different styles like mid-century modern, farmhouse, ultra modern, craftsman, there's Victorian, Cape Cod. The thing is, a lot of people have been looking at all these styles and they get excited about it, and then they buy their first flip house and then they end up just doing all of the styles. But here's the problem with that. What that actually does is it confuses buyers. To demand the best price, you need the biggest market. You need that house to appeal to the most people. That's pretty obvious. The other thing that this does that might not be so obvious is it makes the house so much smaller. See, because instead of somebody coming to buy house, they're buying rooms because each room is a separate style, so it doesn't feel cohesive. That's why when we buy houses, we make sure that we run the same floors from the front door to the back door. No transitions between rooms. We use the same paint colors in every room. We use the same hardware. We use a similar style from the outside of the house all the way throughout. This makes the house feel so much bigger. Now, I just want to remind you that all of these hacks are really about optimizing your return on investment. Now, I'm not knocking the creative types out there that want to hodgepodge, but you just have to understand that if you are hodgepodging, you're focusing more on your creative expression than you are your ROI. And what is the biggest inhibitor of your ROI? Well, pretty simple. It's paying too much from the start. You see, no matter how much rehab you put into the property, no matter how much you follow all of these hacks that we talked about in this video, you are just never going to be able to increase the sales price past what those range of comps will tell you. So what you end up doing is spending all this money on rehab, and you're not increasing your sales price in a way that makes sense. I think there are really 4 things that cause people to overpay for their house. Number 1 is confirmation bias. See, you work really hard to find a deal, especially if you're prospecting for your own leads. And so when you finally do get a deal under contract, you just want to make it work so bad that when you're looking for comps out there, you find the ones that you want to find. And I don't really know what else to tell you, except for you have to be conscious about this and pick all the comps, not just the ones that you want. 2 is not understanding neighborhood lines. I see a lot of out-of-state buyers who they just didn't realize that those railroad tracks were the separation between a great neighborhood and a not so great neighborhood, meaning really high comps to not so high comps. And they end up buying on the wrong side of the tracks, thinking they can sell for the same price as that nice neighborhood. 3 is counting houses that are for sale as part of your comps. You see, if it hasn't sold yet, it's not a real comparison. When it's for sale, it's just for sale for whatever somebody thought. An appraiser does not use for sales. They'll only use houses that have actually been sold. You see, the for sale price is always going to be higher than what it actually sold for. Number 4, probably the most important thing, is really understanding the scale of livability and where you're buying at. See, I just ran into this issue the other day. See, what I wanted to do was just buy it and creep it forward through the line of livability into this barely bankable category. But after getting into it a little bit, I found out that I wasn't going to be able to do that. I was actually going to have to gut the house, bring it all the way down to bombed out, and then try to hop over to the range of comps. Because as I said before, once you're at bombed out, you really don't push it to barely bankable. You have to go all the way. Now, if you overpay from the start, it doesn't matter how good you are at rehabbing, how many contractors you know, or how many psychological hacks you have. Your return on investment is just not gonna make sense for you. But what if you've implemented these psychological hacks perfectly and you got a great deal on the front end? Well, unfortunately, there are still 7 catastrophic events that can totally wreck your return on investment. And I made a whole video about it right here.